Good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Sigrid Quack, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of SASE and this year's virtual organizers, the KHK Center for Global Cooperation Research, the Institute for Work Skills and Training, and the Deutsche Institut für Interdisziplinäre Sozialpolitik, all at the University of Duisberg-Essen. We are extremely pleased, and I'm personally also very honored that Professor Hartmut Rosa is joining us today as our featured speakers to present his thoughts on the monster of uncontrollability and an epitome of polar inertia, lessons from the pandemic. Let me briefly introduce Professor Rosa. Hartmut Rosa is an internationally prominent sociologist and political scientist. He holds the chair of sociology at the Friedrich Schiller University of Jena and is the director of the Max Weber Center for Advanced Cultural and Social Studies at the University of Erfurt, both in Germany. He has been a visiting scholar at the New School for Social Research in New York, among others. He is a leading representative of the new critical theory and has published widely on the sociology of time and identity formation. Notable are his two books in English on social acceleration, Columbia Press 2015, and Acceleration Towards a Critical Theory of Late Modern Temporality, earlier published by NSU Press, Malmö and Aarhus in 2010. It was also translated into French, by the way, for those who prefer that language. He is a co-editor of the international peer-reviewed journal on Time and Society. Here is how we will proceed. After Professor Rosa's lecture, there will be time for short Q&A. Please feel free to send your questions and comments through the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, and I will then read them out and Professor Rosa can answer. So, Professor Rosa, a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us and making it possible. Looking very much forward to your lecture. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sigrid, for this very kind introduction and also for the invitation to this very interesting conference and also to this very impressive conference. I really find it very, very impressive to see what you're all doing and discussing here. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion too. So I wasn't, or I'm still not quite 100% sure of what you would really like to hear, where I should focus on, but I will just give you well, my interpretation of the current Corona and COVID crisis, and what kind of sociological lessons I would want to take to learn from them. And then I'm very curious to hear your ideas and thoughts, and your also, if you like, your counter arguments. Right? I would like to share my screen because I've prepared some PowerPoint slides, and this I will do now. Oh, it's already there. Good. So I hope it works. If it does not work, you somehow have to stop me, right? But so I have animated the slides, but I think it works. All right, so it's lessons from the pandemic, and as Sigrid has already told you, the one title I chose was A Monster of Uncontrollability. I will start with that and tell you what I mean with it or by it, because it actually refers to the latest small book I've written, which came out with Politics Press recently. It has the title Uncontrollability. Uncontrollability is not the perfect translation for the German term Unverfügbarkeit, but it's kind of impossible to translate it. But I will explain to you what I mean by it in a minute. So I will move in 5 steps. The first, I will explain why I think that Corona, it's like an epitome of it's modernity's nightmare, in fact, right? Because all of a sudden the world becomes completely uncontrollable, or almost completely uncontrollable, right? And in a world that really is geared towards establishing control, domination, Now this is it's like a nightmare, right? And in the second step, I want to point out to you, or to go back to this what Sigrid Quack has already and also mentioned, the temporal issue, because I do think that I think actually there can be no doubt that Corona or the COVID crisis, the pandemic, has been a slowdown of social life and also of economic life, and particularly of the physical material world, to an unparalleled degree, actually, in the past, right? But of course, this has been paralleled by a digital speed up. Right? Then I want to draw. This is something I'm working on. I hope that I will be able to publish a small book on it, but I still have to write it. Right, a phenomenology of the pandemic, so to speak, trying to give you some phenomenological insights from the crisis. And then I want to go a bit more political and ask what we can learn out of it. Because this is something I'm always asked as a sociologist. Right, people ask me, how will we live after the pandemic, right? What will the consequences be? Will our world be more global or less global, more solidaristic or more egoistic, and so on, more even or more equal or more unequal? And I think there my main point is that this is not something that's up for prediction. It depends on action. It depends on what we do, what we learn from it. And therefore, in the final step, I want to somehow give a plea for a political self-efficacy, and claim that we have actually seen that what we have learned in the crisis is that we are capable of political action, and that therefore we should seize the opportunity, basically. Okay, so let's get started. Well, I mean, it depends on what I've really done. The subtitle of my social acceleration book is A New Theory of Modernity, right? And I've also worked on it in the Resonance book, which came out later, which is my biggest book so far, right? And there the main claim is that modernity, or modern society, let's call it, can be understood as a society that in its whole structural content, in its structural fabric, so to speak, aims at making the world controllable, verfügbar in German, right? And in English, I like to call Verfügbarkeit the AAA horizon. So my claim is that all the institutions of modernity, but also the cultural orientation, goes towards increasing the horizon of what is available, attainable, and accessible for us, right? Of what we can see, of what we can control, of what we can have, etc. Right? For example, money is so important because if you're rich, if there's a lot of money on your bank account, the horizon of where you can go, of what you can buy, of where you can live, etc., increases. And this is why technology is interesting, right? With better technology, with a car, the horizon of where you can go in the evening or in the weekend explodes in comparison to where you could go when you had to walk, for example, or ride the bike. Even though even the bike is an increase of the horizon of availability as compared with going by on foot. And then, of course, the plane again increases the horizon of availability. And if you're Elon Musk, the milliardaire, the billionaire, and then even the Mars or the outer space comes into the horizon of availability, and so on. So my claim is that modernity, not just by its cultural aspirations, but also by the logic of its institutions, right? What is science about? For example, right? Science is about increasing the horizon of what can be seen with telescopes. We pierce deeper and deeper into the universe, and with satellites we want to go there, make it accessible. And with a microscope we can go further and further into the depths of matter, and so on. And technology makes the world available, attainable, accessible, right? I can decide how hot it is, how cold it is, how warm it is, how loud it is. So this increases the horizon of what is available, attainable, and accessible to me, right? And so I already talked about money, and even law. I believe even the logic of law is making the world predictable, and in that sense controllable, right? Okay. So that's what modernity is about: making the world visible, predictable, reliable, engineerable, usable, controllable, etc. I do not believe that human beings always aimed at this, right? I believe it's a specificity of what I call a modern social formation. And as I said, there are structural reasons for this. I actually believe it has become a kind of structural requirement because my sociological analysis of a modern society is that it can only stabilize itself dynamically, right? I call it the mode of dynamic stabilization. And this means in order to keep what we have, to preserve the jobs, the pension schemes, the healthcare systems, and so on, we have to accelerate, to innovate, and to achieve economic growth year by year. You could actually say year by year, we have to run faster just to stay in place, just to maintain the world as it is, right? Without increasing the AAA horizon, right? We cannot keep the social systems, for example, the social policies, but actually also the rest of the economy and of politics and so on. But I believe there is also kind of cultural aspiration, a cultural drive in the same direction. And this is our definition of the good life, of the good per se, right? I think we define the good as being an increase in the AAA horizon, in the horizon of what is available, attainable, and accessible. I leave this the idea of parametric optimization aside for now. No, but I think the problem really is that we always find, and I think right now we find it, that the world is basically uncontrollable, right? It's even unpredictable. And my claim is really that we are in a kind of paradoxical situation as a society, even totally independent of Corona, right? Because on the one hand, we have become really good at making the world controllable, accessible, engineerable, of increasing the AAA horizon, right? Almost to a point where we have become omnipotent. But there is a strange flip side which makes us experience or feel totally powerless on the other side, right? On the reverse side of our omnipotence. My main example for this is that look at it, I think it's really a paradigmatic example. When we have come to split the atom, Oppenheimer and his colleagues, right, who discovered how to use nuclear power, basically, right, they really felt like, and they said so, and I understand that very well, that we have now become almost godlike creatures because we can get to the inner core of matter and control it, split the atom, right, the nucleus of it. But at the same time, this capacity, this almost omnipotence, has created the threat of complete powerlessness in the face of a nuclear explosion, of a bomb or a power station that explodes, right? So our omnipotence has a flip side of the threat of the shade, so to speak, the dark side of powerlessness. And I believe that's actually true too for the whole of our relationship with nature. We have come to control nature, to make it available, attainable, accessible, to an unparalleled degree, right? We can use all the powers of nature and we can control it, right? But nevertheless, the flip side of it is that we feel actually nature, that's the thing which we threaten to destroy and which then threatens to destroy us. That's uncontrollability, the climate change, right? The drought, the hurricanes, the heat waves. We can no longer control them. We feel completely powerless, right? And it's not only true for nature, it's even true for the political world. With things like Brexit or Donald Trump, it seems like that the political world has become totally unpredictable, even uncontrollable, right? By the way, I have another political, I believe that right-wing populism is really right-wing populism lives on the claim that we can take back control. You know, that was the slogan of the Brexiteers, right? Take back control, regain political control over the world. And this arises from a feeling of powerlessness, right? So theoretically, the idea of political sovereignty promises that we can control the world, but the experience is we don't. So right-wing populism steps in, right? But even hard-nosed economists, right, feel a kind of uncontrollability of financial markets. The financial markets are a kind of totally uncontrollable beast which can explode any moment, right? And by the way, this flip side of total power and total powerlessness is something all of us experience with a remote control, right? We sit in a room and we are almost omnipotent. If you live in a smart home or if you drive in a smart car, you can make it hot, you can make it cold, just with one press of the thumb, right? You can make it bright light or dark night or very loud heavy metal music or total silence. until something fails, something is wrong, right? Maybe the machine says, just one moment, please, one moment, please, one moment, please. And there's absolutely nothing you can do. So my claim is modernity is about aspiring control of the world. And the nightmare is the complete uncontrollability of the world. And of course, Corona is like the manifestation of this nightmare, right? It's something, all of a sudden, something creeps up. It's in the air, it's everywhere, right? The thing is, it's like in a zombie movie. I think this is why it's very close to what zombie movies are about, right? You don't know who's already infected. It's the monster can lurk anywhere. You don't see it, but it's everywhere and it's very dangerous, right? It's uncontrollable. And of course, Corona has been scientifically undiscovered, medically unexplored. It's politically uncontrollable. Its economic consequences are unclear. And more than that, it's even for us as individuals, it's invisible, it's inaudible, it's intangible, right? It's really the epitome of uncontrollability, Unverfügbarkeit in German, right? So I think this is why it has become such a central focus also of all action and of all attention, right? I think it's obvious why it is culturally significant. It's also obvious why it is politically so significant, because we want to regain control at all price. I mean, this desire to control life has made us bring down 95% of air traffic in last year in March, right? Because so we were ready to pay an enormous price to regain control. And as I said, what Corona is for us as a society, or maybe that's the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it is a monster of uncontrollability, and in that sense, our nightmare, right? So the reaction to this was really that we did slow the world down at a historically unparalleled degree. I mean, of course, when you have an economic recession, there's some form of deceleration, or when you have a war, some segments of society are decelerated, but in fact, even a war, we talk about mobilization in military language, right? A war is really setting an incredible amount of the world physically and materially and bodies in motion, right? So wars are not phases of slowdown. And even in economic recessions, you see that there were phases where the acceleration process has slowed down. But I claim, actually, it's interesting. You can see it when you compare the Corona crisis, the pandemics, or the COVID crisis with the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, right? The amount to which we have kind of slowed down or even halted physical transport, physical movement, but also social activities is absolutely incomparable, right? So, for example, these numbers, right? Up to 95% of air traffic at some point was kind of halted, and 80% of inner city mobility in Milano, for example, has occurred. An increase of 80%, no, a decrease of 80% of inner city mobility. 50% of German highway circulation has stopped, so to speak. So with regard to the physical material motion, it's an unparalleled slowdown. And actually, this is a seismological fact, right? There has been a seismological, geological measurement, which said that you could really see that the movement on Earth, underneath Earth, and above Earth by the airplanes has greatly reduced and had quite significant even meteorological effects. But of course, some people think, since Rosa is a critic of acceleration, he must think this is a good thing. But I would not necessarily say so, right? I mean, actually, I wouldn't say so for a number of reasons, right? First, of course, it was an enforced slowdown. It wasn't by a change of social structure, right? It was kind of, it's like a traffic jam. A traffic jam is also an enforced slowdown, and it's Zwangsentschleunigung in German, right? And no one, or almost no one, enjoys a traffic jam, right? And secondly, of course, it certainly wasn't good for all, because not everyone was slowed down. If you worked in hospitals or in healthcare or in some segments of the police or in politics or in digital industries, by the way, then it wasn't a form or a phase of slowdown. It was actually a time of speed up, right? And of course, it came with uneven economic and emotional effects, because if you, for some people, being slowed down was a very bad experience, particularly when you were threatened by losing your job or your income. Actually, I think unemployment is a form of slowdown, but of course, then time is devaluated for those who are affected by it. So yes, it was a slowdown, but it wasn't a slowdown in the idea of a new utopia or so. Then it's also very interesting when I claim that the pandemics or the COVID crisis was a slowdown. It was a physical material slowdown, right? Our bodies and our physical and material exchanges did slow down. But then there was a kind of complementary, of course, process, namely a digital speed up. And I think this has really simply, kind of advanced a process that was going on anyway, namely a complete split between the digital speed and the digital world and the physical, the material world, right? So people found very quickly, if this is a phenomenology, that their free time resources were sucked up by digital events, right? It's very interesting. You normally, I mean, the idea was, now we should have a lot of time at our hands. And many people really felt that they were somehow, that the feeling that time is scarce and that we should do something, the activation for some time was kind of internalized or came from the inside. So we felt, a lot of people reported that they felt driven to permanently screen the screens, so to speak, right? To check the news channels and watch something on Netflix and the social media and all the YouTube videos and so on. So there was a rush towards the digital world. So the slowdown was physical, but there was in psychological terms, there was a digital speed up, so to speak. And then very soon, it wasn't just a kind of individual thing that people felt they had to somehow communicate, stay up to date, do something and so on. But then it became a kind of social requirement again, because everyone said, oh, let's do something digital, right? So church services or musical events and theaters and of course, everything on the work floors or a lot of it was simply shifted towards the digital world, right? Okay. So I think what the result of all this was a situation which Paul Virilio, the French theorist of speed, so to speak, had predicted in the 1980s. He said the logic of speeding up the world will result in something he called polar inertia. And he said that on the one hand, there will be a total high speed in the digital world. He said there will be, the fluids, the fluids of the streams of digital data will run at the speed of light all around the world all the time. But physically, we will almost stop moving at all because we are glued, he thought, not just to the screen, but even to the things we wear, right? There should be data gloves and so on connecting us to the world. And the experience not for everyone, right? It depends on the segments of society, but for quite substantial segments of the society, the experience there was exactly this. For me, for example, right? For weeks or even months, I kind of stayed in this very place all day from morning 8 to maybe in the evening at 8 o'clock because I was digitally connected. The camera is here and the microphone is here. So I could not, I cannot move around. Even if I go here, I'm already out of focus, right? So I'm at a complete physical standstill, but digitally I talk to people in India in the morning and then in London at noon and maybe in Palo Alto or in Berkeley or whatever it is in the evening. So it's exactly what Virilio predicted, frenetic standstill. On the one hand, you're permanently floating around, so to speak, or rushing about, and physically, and you are at a standstill, right? And I think that was also on a macro level exactly what happened. The data, the digital, the data and the information streams exploded, but the physical exchange slowed down. Now, one point which I find very important when we look back one day, right, at what happened to us, it's very important to see that it wasn't actually the virus which achieved the slowdown or which did slow us down. I mean, the virus did not corrode the motors of the airplanes or so, right? And it did not halt the soccer league or even close down schools and theaters and so on. It was political action, right? So the slowdown was a political thing. It was political action, and it also was a political achievement. It's different from if you have a volcano or something of this sort erupting, and then you have to halt the airplanes because otherwise they would fall down. Then it's really a kind of natural thing. But here it wasn't the virus which slowed down anything. But the slowdown, of course, was not just physical movement. It was also slowdown of social life, as you all know, right? Because a lot of social lives, including schools, universities, sports events, theaters, museums, and so on, closed down. So it was a slowdown for about a year or so, but of course, with different phases in between. Now, I really find it interesting to think about how did this affect mental health, if you so like, or our well-being. And it's very interesting. You have interesting data coming up, I believe, right? One interesting thing is that the first lockdown in March 2020, for most people, at least in our Middle European or Northern American societies, right, it wasn't so bad, right? I mean, quite a lot of people felt that this was a state of emergency, an exceptional state, right? It kind of, I wouldn't want to speak of sacred time, right? But it was something unusual going on, right? And in fact, it's very interesting that for a lot of people, this didn't feel so bad, right? There's interesting data by the most important German weekly newspaper, Die Zeit. It has a kind of, it's quite well known all over the world, right? And it has the highest readership of all journals, weekly journals in Germany. And they have for a number of years now, they have it's a very easy measurement, right? They collect data where readers are simply asked, digital readers, right, or on the digital website to indicate whether they feel well or not so well on that day, right? And the interesting thing is that for many years, it was surprisingly stable. Almost exactly 2/3 of the readers said they feel quite well today, and about 1/3 said they don't feel too well. And this was only, the volatility was very low, only about 1 or 2%, no more, except, I mean, when the German right-wing populists entered parliament, it went down by about 3% for a number of days. But that was the highest deviation from the 66% level. And in last March, it really, all of a sudden, it changed. It went up. The number of people who said that they feel quite well went up from 66 to 74%. Right? Now, of course, I find this a very interesting finding. We have to be very careful to interpret its meaning, because on the one hand, the readers of the Zeit are very, I mean, they are a well-known, no, not a well-known, but a well-educated and normally quite well-off segment of society. And it's a bit unclear why readers said that they are okay or that they are well today. It might be that they compared their health and their situation with the images they saw from Northern Italy on their TV screen or so. And then they said, well, compared with that, I feel quite well. So it's a bit unclear what it means, but it's quite significant that in this first phase, even mental health reports indicated as suicide rates, for example, went down. They didn't go up or so, right? So, but this changed last autumn, when a lot of European countries entered a second extensive phase of lockdown, because then people had the feeling that this is the new normal. It's no longer a state of exception or of emergency, right? It could go on forever. It could be that from now on we have to live like that. And this really changed the situation dramatically, right? From there, the data I have seen indicates that for most people, this then was no longer anything that possibly could be enjoyed or so on. And particularly with the young people, you know that, I'm quite sure, particularly from then on, the problems really increased a lot. And there are reports of so-called digital fatigue. You might suffer from digital fatigue during this very talk, right? I find this very interesting, right? A lot of people report, and there are now psychological studies, for example, in Northern America, done about it. Why do a lot of people say that after one day in this state, right, kind of polar inertia, they feel totally drained? And I had this feeling that that's true for me too, right? At the end of such a day, I feel totally powerless, actually out of energy. And I think it's very interesting to reflect on what the reasons could be for this, right? The absence of co-presence. I said, well, one reason is that, yes, you can see me on the screen right now, but I mean, one problem is I don't see you. I only see my own screen. I don't see anyone. I don't see anyone's face getting in resonance with me. You know, resonance is my big topic, right? But even if you have a kind of normal Zoom or Skype or whatever meeting, then we do see each other, that's true, but we cannot look each other into the eyes. We cannot read faces. And I think this is very tiring, because either you see my eyes or I see your eyes, but we don't see each other's eyes. And human beings are geared towards resonance. I believe this is a kind of anthropological feature. We have learned for hundreds, thousands of years to read each other's faces, right? The face, the eyes, and the tiny muscle movements, right? They actually send forms of communication and of resonance. We see that we are kind of agreeing or that we are disagreeing. And if you don't have these signals, then of course the brain starts to look for other signals. And it's also a problem with the auditive world, right? I don't hear you now either, right? And even if you do hear me, it's normally through a loudspeaker. That's not the same as being in a shared room. This physical co-presence, I've thought a lot about it, and I could go on for hours on this point, right? Because I mean, the thing with, if we were in one room together, as I assume your meetings normally were like, right, then we somehow knew in our subconscious awareness that we share the same space. We feel the heat, maybe we hear the noise coming from the street, maybe a fire engine or so going by, and we see the light, and we are physically co-present. Right now I am in a space here, I do hear noises from the outside and so on, but I have to block them out because they are not relevant right now. I go the direct direction to you. And I mean, there are two more reasons about digital fatigue. One is that you feel stared at when you're in a Zoom conference, right? Because you actually are stared at, right? All the people watch you all the time. That's very unnormal for human beings. And you look into a mirror all day, right? Because you see yourself. That's a very non-normal way of being, and this might explain the digital fatigue. Going back to a more theoretical point, I think, you know, I said, in modernity, as a society as well as individuals, we are geared towards increasing the horizon of availability, attainability, accessibility, and or the horizon of Weltreichweite, as I say in German, right? The horizon of what we can attain, access, and so on. And Corona has really led to a contraction or a shrinking of this horizon, right? Most of the world has become unavailable for us. You cannot go to this other city. You cannot go to the meeting. Even the theater or the sports club or the choir you sing in or whatever it is, the orchestra you play with, they're all unavailable, unattainable, right? In lockdown phases, it's really true that the space of which you could get access to, or your spatial horizon of availability did shrink to about 500 meters or 1 kilometer around your house. And the same is true for our temporal horizon, right? No one could tell what would happen 1 week ago or 1 month ago. So this was a very interesting new form of being in space and time. And there's one more point, you know, I found this extremely interesting about culture, right? I mean, what happens right now in the cultural realm? Okay, let me make this other point about social energy. I'm running out of time anyway, right? About social energy. I really want to write a new book on where social energy comes from. And we don't have a conception of social energy. We only have conceptions of physical energy normally. And then maybe psychological conceptions like either libido or as the motivational energy. But even motivational energy is a bit unclear concept, but it always suggests that the source of energy is within me. I have a lot of energy today. But I think there are social sources. There's something like circulating social energy, to use Stephen Greenblatt's term. And the best sociological approach to this is by Randall Collins. He talks, I think, unfortunately, he talks about emotional energy, but he says that our energy to act, our motivation to act, comes out of small interactions out of interactions, right? Being physically together, and these interactions are not necessarily the intended ones, right? When you are, let's say, at a conference site, you are in a permanent, it's a field of suspension too, right? You see a lot of people. Some will greet you, which you did not expect. Some will not greet you while you expected it from them. Some will kind of irritate you, maybe. Some will confuse you. Some will be very nice to you. So this small forms of interaction create social energy, and we were completely lacking this social energy because a lot of people really said that, particularly as the situation dragged on, that they no longer feel the motivation to leave their home, to call their friends or meet them. This is what made me think what happened to us, right? It seems like there's a kind of total fatigue. In German, I say Mehltau, right? It's a kind of almost paralyzation or apathy that has come down to society. And I think this is due to the missing of tight, tiny micro interactions. And the interesting thing is that Hans Blumenberg, the German philosopher, says it is this tight interaction, and he says the detour that creates creates creativity, so to speak, and creates culture, right? Culture is the thing which is coming up there where you do not go the direct way towards a solution. And this is what made me think about universities. You know, on a worldwide scale, we have closed down and halted university life. I really think that maybe in 500 years, when historians will look back on our age, they will say that this was the most important point. Why? Because in the small university communities, right, or in the big university communities, those are the spaces where creativity is kind of bursting. You know, Richard Florida, who says why we need these kind of environments. It's, you know, it's people coming together and not having a clear aim and agenda, but doing kind of unexplored things, just being together, doing nonsense. And all of a sudden, this is the place where creativity comes from. I mean, think of all the, you know, the Silicon Valley startups, right? They all came out of when students were doing something they didn't quite know what they were doing. At the end of a party, they had an idea. And this is also, those are also the sites for social and political innovation, right? Like the 1968 revolution, or all forms of revolution, right? So in Brazil or so, the government is quite happy to close down universities and to buy the lessons, right? The lectures from American think tanks or so, because there you can teach directly. You can teach what you have to teach, right? And you can provide the information and the knowledge, and you can transfer the knowledge in the direct way from A to B in the best possible way, right? And Hans Blumenberg says, if you take the direct route from A to B, you will end up in a state in a barbarian state, right? This is killing culture. This is killing creativity. And I found this a very worthwhile idea, right? There is a loss of social energy because there is a loss of micro interaction, this physical social distancing, right? Which, or you could put it this way, the physical distancing, which was called social distancing, in the end has really led to a kind of social distancing, which is killing social energy and social creativity. And I just want to mention it, if this is interesting to you, I'm really like to talk about it, because I think we have greatly and dramatically underestimated the price our youngsters have to pay, right? Not so much the children, but from all I know from the data too, it's the adolescents, right, between, let's say, 15 and 25 who suffer the most. And it seems to me so obvious why they suffer the most, not because they want to party or they have too much energy or so, but it's you can sociologically explain it. You know, look, if you're old as me, right, then you have a place in the world. You have a home in the world physically. I know where I live, right? I have a family. Maybe I have a house. I have a job. I have certain friends and so on. So of course I can hold this for half a year. That's not a problem. But when you're between 15 and 25, you don't have this place. You're actually supposed, and you feel like moving out of your parents' home. But what is your place in the world? Where can you find it? How can you find it? Who are your friends? Are you capable of making new friends and relatives, right? Can you find a partner for life, right? But also you have to find out what are your axes of resonance in the cultural world. What kind of event would I like to go to the soccer game, or to the theater, or to the cinema, or to the church service? And this is kind of found out in micro interaction, in a tight social atmosphere, and of interaction, of trial and error. And we have halted this for over a year. This is almost killing young people. And you know what? We are killing young people, I would really say, because there is, I mean, if you look at the mental health data for this age group, there's this big American mental health survey, right? You find alarming signs. And even, for example, in Germany and Switzerland, our institutions, the medical facilities for mental health for the juveniles, right? They talk about having to do triage. They cannot take everyone who is in danger of committing suicide or in a state of depression. So I think as a society, we certainly did not pay enough attention to this. Okay, now I have to speed up because I want to discuss with you also, but the last 2 points are rather easy. As I think I already said it in the beginning, we cannot simply predict. There is not a sociological model or an economic model or any other form of model that can predict how we will come out of the pandemics and what we will do in the future. It's up for political action. I really think Hannah Arendt's point is so important there. She says natality, not just mortality, but natality is the defining feature of the human species. We can start anew. We can change what we are doing, right? Hans Joas calls it the creativity of action. So it's a question of all of us. What lessons do we want to learn? It's not sociologically or economically or technologically predictable, right? And now I believe that in our world, and I think you can actually see it in the world which I described earlier, what I call in a state of dynamic stabilization, where you permanently have to speed up and to optimize and to rationalize in order to stay where you are. This creates a kind of structural conservatism. Why? Because it becomes more and more risky to change things. You know, what you do, what I do for a living, right? Or in our everyday actions, they are part of huge chains of interaction. And if you change one thing on your place, it has huge ramifications which you cannot even foresee. So I think this creates a kind of structural inertia or structural conservatism. But once you are in a crisis, once a society is in a crisis and the chains of interaction are interrupted in many places, right? And the routines no longer work, then it opens up a kind of historical opportunity for a change of path, right? So normally we act, and particularly in acceleration society, right? We act in manners of path dependency. You have to stay at your place in society, right? But when the path becomes kind of unclear because there is this break in normal operations, then that's a change, that's the chance for a paradigm change. I really think we can apply Thomas Kuhn's model of scientific operations here. He would say that in normal science, like in normal social life, everyone does what he or she is supposed to do and what is kind of in the rules and routines and guidebooks. But once these chains break and there's a new situation, then actually the situation for a society is the question, do we go back to the old normal, to the old path, or do we try something new? I call this a point of bifurcation where you can start a new path. And I think in this situation, since it depends on our political action and not on some economic or sociological model, we have to remember to remind ourselves that the so-called old normal was quite pathological anyway, right? This, what I call dynamic stabilization or acceleration society, leads to a burning up, to a heating of the ecospheres, or to global warming, and to a burning out of our souls, right? Of the subjects, and even to a burning out, so to speak, of the political processes, which I think you can see in many spaces, right? So I believe there is time for a change, and this is my last point. There is an opportunity for a change, I believe, because there already is this break with modernity. For the first time, we have slowed down the world significantly, and we have done it by political action. So my hope is that we can actually say this is an experience of self-efficacy. Yes, we can act politically. And this is, and it was democratically elected governments, not only, right? China acted too, but in Europe or Northern America, it was, after all, democratically elected and controlled governments. And they could all of a sudden kind of concentrate all actions, right? And make it into coherent social reaction to a crisis. So when you compare this to Niklas Luhmann's predictions and all those working in systems theory, and not just those, they always said, actually, when you read systems theoretical texts, starting with Luhmann, he says, Armin Nassei, my German colleague, he wrote a book. It came out right before the pandemics, where he said modern society does not even have a veto player. We are incapable. It has no center, right? You cannot bring down planes because there is no agent who could do it, right? We cannot act in a concentrated and concerted way as a society. And I think the pandemics has proven this clearly wrong. Yes, we can. We can act politically in an incredibly strong way, because actually we have kind of broken the logic of functional differentiation, right? As you see here, right? We could, for example, not just bring down airplanes and stop football and so on, but governments also initiated and paid certain research. They nationalized some industries, or they ordered some industries to produce necessary things like breathing machines and so on, right? Or they introduced in many places, at least for the time being, something like a basic income, right? So you could, I'm not sure whether this is good or not, but we have made the experience that our modern state is a kind of center of social action if needed and if wanted. So why should we not use this center of social action when it comes to other social ills like climate change, or the vast and still increasing global inequality, or for stopping the arms race? I really think that the political myth that has always been told and in the end believed even by sociologists like me is that we no longer have this political center, that politics is just about it. It's just one system among many. And I think that's wrong. And that's a good thing. We have made the experience, yes, we can act concerted, coherently in a political way, even though, of course, this does not mean we can solve all the problems, right? The pandemic is still with us. But nevertheless, I prefer to remain an optimist, and therefore I think a better world is still possible. Thank you very much for your resonance, for listening, and for discussing this with me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Hartmut, for a really sweeping and exciting lecture. I felt really swept away, and I also could see faces that all of us have experienced along the way. You know, your phenomenology of the pandemic, I think, captures the experiences of many here in this virtual room. So we can move to discussion now. Please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and I will read them out. And I have already one question for you. So Giorgio is asking, I read the question out as it is. You made a relation with the rise of the extreme right, which suggests to have a formula to regain control. Do you see also a relation with the rise of religion as a political force in many parts of the world? And the second question is, it seems to me the loss of AAA is different in different regions in the world, depending on poor, rich, or perception that things are going forward in China. Yeah, that was a question I had also listening to you, because in other panels at this conference, there was a lot of discussion, you know, about threats or growing global inequality also because of the vaccine situation, etc. Please. And others, please send their questions through Q&A.
Yeah, on the first question, I would clearly agree with this. I really believe, I mean, you know, there are different ways of dealing with uncertainty, with the uncontrollability of the world. I mean, one way of dealing with it clearly is the welfare state, right, so to speak, or a strong political and welfare system, which somehow promises to make somehow controllable at least some of its effects, right? Even if you become unemployed, even if you become sick, and even if you die, right, you can somehow have control over. Interestingly, even if you die, you can somehow, you know, that your family will be cared for, you can decide on what will be done with your property and so on. So yes, welfare, social policies and welfare regimes are one way to deal with the insecurities and the risks of modern life. And the other is this idea of religion, that, you know, this is exactly, actually in my acceleration book, I have a chapter on this where I make this argument to say, I mean, money is also one thing, right? I don't know what will happen. I don't know if I will lose my job. I don't know if I will fall sick, but having more money is better than having less money because I can do something with it, right? And the third way is really belief, because you say, I don't know what will happen, God, but you will be with me, right? So this is clearly another strategy of dealing with the insecurity, the uncertainty of life. And I really think, therefore, it is a kind of cultural challenge. How do we deal with the basic uncontrollability of life? And religion is one way to turn, and it might well be. I mean, they are, I think probably in SASE, this is not a surprising claim, but for sociologists, it's interesting to remind us that there is a kind of parallel, a temporal parallel between the going down of the, what we call neoliberal phase, right, where a lot, which actually deliberately increased insecurity in many social situations, and the rise of religion. And the second point I think is very good, and I totally agree with this. I think in the so-called advanced, or however you call them, the West or the North, or the early industrialized societies, there for a long time there's been this sense of moving forward through acceleration, innovation, growth, and so on. The AAA horizon was exploding. So the parents said, our kids should have a better life, right? And this has changed around the year, actually between 1990 and 2000. Now, in really all our countries, in the US in particular, but also in Japan, in Europe, parents say we have to do all we can in order for our kids to keep the standards we have, right? So it's no longer moving forward, but it's different in China or in India or in Brazil, because there's still for a lot of people the sense of moving forward, right, of having the chance of increasing the horizon. But nevertheless, the problems seem to be the same, and I think there's a quickly things are turning similar, but I do see these differences.
Thank you very much. So we have two more questions. I think we post them one by one so you can respond. So Anders is asking, how is your diagnosis of the control drive of modern society and its attendant uncontrollability similar or different from Ulrich Beck's notion of the side effects of modernization and its production of global risks, of which climate and COVID-19 would seem reasonable instances subject to cosmopolitized politics Beck diagnosed?
Yeah, that's a very good question too. It's quite interesting, because in one of the last articles Ulrich Beck actually did write we co-wrote it, right? Because I somehow became friends, probably is too much, but we have become we invited him in to our colloquium in Jena, the social theory colloquium, and then we started to write an contribution, an article together, which actually was published in German, and it will be published very soon in English too, where we really tried to explore exactly this question. And we found that it's not exactly the same diagnosis. For me, I think the difference really is that for me, it's this need to, I call it the escalatory logic, right? To escalate, to permanently speed up, to grow, and to innovate, what I call dynamic stabilization. That's a bit different from the side effects, right, in Ulrich Beck's conception. But in the end, particularly with the aspect of uncontrollability, the two approaches are quite similar. And yeah, it's a pity that we cannot explore it any further, but we've made one step there.
Thank you. So Sabrina is asking, I really enjoyed the very optimistic tone of the presentation. Thank you. What do you think about the corona conspiracy theorists who are not unsure but very certain in their way of making sense about the virus? What do these ways of sense-making mean for the ability to create resonance in society or join political actions?
To create resonance, yeah. I mean, of course, that is a problem. I mean, there's obviously a problem in our political culture. I think that's obvious, right? And I agree with you. I mean, what we call conspiracy theories, which you have in the corona crisis. But actually, for me, it's very important to see and to say that this the tendency to believe in conspiracy theories, I don't think, I mean, it did not only start with corona, right, or with COVID crisis. It was there before, and actually it rather went down, at least in the beginning of the crisis, right? I think that's very important. But it's absolutely true. Conspiracy theories are kind of, they are those who actually do not accept uncontrollability at all. I think that that's the core of conspiracy theories, the idea that someone must be responsible, right? Someone must be doing it, like Corona or whatever happens, even the financial crisis, right? The idea is always that must have been in someone's interest, and then they come with a cui bono theory. Who could be interested? And then it is, you know, they always have answers to this. So I think even this kind of conspiracy theorists, right, who are, as you say, who are sure about who it was, is a symptom of our modern incapability to appropriately deal with the basic uncontrollability, Unverfügbarkeit, I would also say unengineerability of life. And I think that, but you might be right. Actually, you know, I mean, it's dangerous to say it's even recorded, but I think if we don't talk in scientific conferences, then we should, and then we have lost that all, right? I really believe that also maybe on the political left, right, with what we call woke culture or whatever, there might be a kind of, it's not a similar tendency, but there is a kind of also the attempt to regain I'm not sure whether that's a good argument, right? But the attempt, for example, to totally purify language also, right? And to not accept any flaw at all. I mean, I'm not sure whether that's a good point, but there might be a similar aspiration towards getting towards establishing or regaining control. But okay, I take this back. Maybe it's a bad argument, but what I do see is that in political confrontation, there is this. Michael Bruta has written about this. It's a loss of the confrontation of discourse in a way that allows for the fact of differing opinions, that it's possible to have a different view, to have a different opinion, to have a different goal, right? I mean, for me, this is something that goes with the uncontrollability. You cannot always say which is the right way. And it seems to me that on the right as on the left, this is kind of lost, right? For both, there is the right way and disaster on the other hand. So I think you're right. I mean, in political terms, it's quite difficult to establish spheres of resonance, which we desperately need to, well, for everything.
I mean, I was thinking in regard to that point, it would fit in some ways even to the temporal pattern of that you were describing. I mean, I think that my reading of the reports is that the conspiracy theories became really spiral in the second lockdown phases, you know, when the uncontrollability became the normalcy. So it was not the exceptional state. And what I have read historically, it means also that in wars you had kind of scaling up the longer the war remained in terms of the conspiracy theory. So I mean, there might be just some thoughts, you know.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that's exactly what the data says, as far as I know it, right? I mean, all those conspiracy theories and the right-wing populists were very down, right, in the first phase, and trust in government was hugely increasing, right? And then it shifted again.
I have another question from Ursula. Thanks so much, Hartmut. Question related to the loss of social energy. How can we better prepare the next generation, young people, within our educational institution to cope with this new phenomenon? To what extent need they be involved themselves in such discussions? And I thought it was really a good point in your lecture to draw attention to that specific group, which is often ignored or doesn't take the attention it really requires in public discussions.
Yeah, I think so too, because I really believe it's important. And the problem really is that we don't really have a language. We don't have a language of social energy, right? I mean, neither the grown-ups nor the young ones did have, because we didn't have any experience with this, right? So we don't have a language to put in words what we feel and what they feel. Because I mean, I found it quite interesting that even though the data suggests that they suffer quite a lot, you don't hear them, right? Students actually, I read a lot of interviews with the students who said they feel that they don't have a right to complain because they are healthy, right? They don't physically, right? They are not even threatened by the pandemic. So they should not complain, right? Because it's very hard to tell what the problem is. And then I think there was the public discourse, which always says, oh, the youngsters want to party, right? They don't think of health or of the old ones, right? So they felt bad because they had this need. They felt this need to meet, right? and they felt bad because they thought they were not the ones to complain. So I really think it's very important also to listen to them. But you know, what got me started on this is the idea that when we had to turn digital in the universities, prediction was that it will be easy for the students. They are used to the digital world. They are digital natives, but the teachers will find it very difficult because we are not. And very soon it turned out to be the other way around, right? We thought, oh, it's great, I can stay at home and prepare my lecture whenever I want. But students said, please, please, please. I was really shocked by the intensity, right, of their desire. Let's meet in physical presence. I mean, some of them had tears in their eyes. It's really true. And no one ever missed classes when it was possible to meet in October or November. So I think it is. So I think their desire and their need is very strong. So we have to work on giving them a language. Maybe they do, probably they find their language much faster than we can give it to them. But we need to listen, and to listen carefully, and not always reduce the debate to how much are you missing parties and these things.
So I think we are coming slowly to a close. I have one more question, and I think I have to close the Q&A now. Thank you very much for sending in your comments and questions. So the last question is by Lucilene. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Thank you very much for the presentation. The pandemic is in a sense pushed people into poverty who had an already difficult situation. This will contribute to increasing inequality also between countries and regions. That comes back to an earlier point. What can be done in terms of political actions, national and international? And maybe if I may follow up, when I heard your last optimistic slide, I mean, having looked at policy reactions, I also thought, you know, there were, I mean, it's a demonstration of really the ability to act politically on certain issues. And they are very strongly related to sovereignty within the nation state. And there is an extreme inability or lack of coordination at a global level, some people say. I mean, I would say it differs between policy phase, but I mean, there is clearly a kind of thinking there, disintegration or disconnection. And I would like to hear your views on that from your perspective. You know, how would you interpret that? I mean, how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I think both these points are absolutely valid. It's true. I mean, the virus very clearly is a global problem, right? But the reactions were national. I mean, they were incredibly national. So we could see it. When I say yes, we can, I was aware of it, but I didn't have enough time to talk on that too, right? It was the nation state who acted basically to a global problem, and this went together with a total loss of solidarity and egoism, right? Even within the European Union, where they closed borders and said we may not export medical equipment, for example, to Italy, who needed it most, right? So that is certainly a problem, right? So the center of political action is national, but the problem was global, no doubt about it. And but of course, I mean, I don't have any better solution than to say we need something like the EU, but we have to change it. We have to drastically change it. And when you look at inequality, I think it's so clear. It's not just, you know, the wages that are unequal. It's the assets, right? The stocks which people have. Some, I mean, inequality is totally rising through the assets of people. I think what we need to do, one solution, what I have in mind really, is to make a global debt cut. Really make a global debt cut, because otherwise I can see how it could work otherwise, right? That would vastly reduce inequality between countries and within countries, right? And then we would have and I think this would actually give us the chance to come up with and to create this new world. As long as we live in this situation where you have these vast inequalities and these vast amounts of debt, which then lead to austerity regimes, it will be very hard to do something against global inequality.
Thank you. A very warm thank you for a very fascinating and really sweeping presentation. Thank you to everybody in the room for questions. People are leaving, understandably, because other sessions are starting. So we say great thanks to you, Hartmut, and for the rest of everybody, continue enjoying the conference.
Thanks to you.